Did you know that some of the same brain circuits involved in rewarding essential needs, like food and water, may also be involved in drug reward and addiction? From substance use to social media, sports betting, and even AI companions, different experiences can affect the brain's motivation and reward systems, making certain behaviors increasingly difficult to control. But what actually makes an experience addictive, and are all forms of addiction driven by the same processes in the brain? In this episode of the Enriched Mindset Podcast, we are joined by Dr. Caleb Browne, a scientist and principal investigator at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, as well as an assistant professor at the University of Toronto. Dr. Browne's research explores the neurobiological processes that support motivated behavior and how that goes wrong in psychiatric disease. The main focus of that is addiction. We also discuss common misconceptions about the brain, surprising discoveries within addiction research, and how our reward systems can shape habits, decision-making, and compulsive behaviors. If you are interested in psychology, neuroscience, or even wondered why certain rewards can become so difficult to resist, then this is an episode you will not want to miss.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Lee.
And I'm Mackenzie. I'm currently completing my psychology undergrad at Laurier University.
And welcome back to the Enriched Mindset Podcast. We're thrilled to join Dr. Caleb Browne to the podcast, whose unique career trajectory and expertise in neuroscience bring a valuable perspective to today's conversation.
So Caleb, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, my name is Caleb Browne. I'm a scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I'm also an assistant professor at the University of Toronto in the departments of Psychiatry and Physiology. The work that we do in the lab is focused on sort of the neurobiology of motivation and addiction. I'm very excited to chat a little bit more about, the kind of work that we do and how it sort of integrates with all the different kind of topics you guys speak on. And yeah, I'm interested to hear your perspective.
Awesome.
Amazing. So we have a little bit of a tradition on this podcast.
Okay.
We like to start each episode off on a lighter note with a psychology-themed dad joke. So we understand that you work with mice, right? So that's a lot of fun, right?
Yeah.
So would you be able to tell me what a mouse's favorite game to play is?
I could guess, but I don't know. I think it's going to be something different.
Okay, what's your guess?
They love running wheels, so it's probably something to do with running.
So hide and squeak.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? That's good. I like that.
You like
Perfect,
that joke?
perfect.
Okay.
I'm
That's good.
happy.
As a dad, it's applicable.
Yeah.
It's fitting.
Now, obviously, we understand that you do work in addictions. Have you ever come across any weird addictions, strange addictions?
In terms of my work, because as you know, I'm very much in the lab, but paying attention to sort of the field and things like that. There's definitely, I don't know if I call anything strange at this point.
Yeah.
It's sort of just, anything that accesses the brain to do the things that any drug would do or anything valuable would do. It can probably be addictive. I mean, there's like a TV show from back in the day, like My Strange Addiction. I remember watching that when I was younger.
Yeah.
And, but it sort of is that addiction? Is it OCD? It's questions, right? But there are a lot of strange things that people may seem to latch onto. But
I can share, one, I guess, strange addiction that I had, which was I used to be addicted to eating soap.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a term for that, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a struggle, but I'm clean now.
I imagine.
We got you.
Okay, that was really good, actually.
Thanks. I was working on the setup for that.
I was thinking, you got the dad joke out of there already. So that's great.
With that being said, let's jump right into the questions we have prepared for you today. So the first question is that you've had a very unique academic journey. So coming from a university like Laurier University, how do you think that experience shaped your career path, since it is quite the smaller university compared to U of T?
To be completely honest, I think that being at Laurier specifically and a smaller university in general, I don't think I'd be where I was today if it wasn't in that environment. I don't know if I would have been able to have the same sort of access to people, access to scientists and things like that if I was in a larger university, just out of numbers. The biggest thing about being at a university like Laurier is smaller programs, smaller sizes. You get access to people to potentially work in their labs and sort of collaborate with and identify ways that you can get involved in science a little bit more easily. And I think there's a lot more incentive for scientists to take on undergraduate students. And I think a biggest part of getting involved in science is starting early and starting during undergrad, and sort of, third year is where you need to make a decision of like, am I going to start getting involved in a lab and volunteer? And so for me, that's what I did. There was a scientist named Bruce McKay at Wilfrid Laurier University. I didn't even take his class.
Oh yeah.
He just had, do you know Bruce?
No, yeah.
Okay, he's
but
a
you
legend.
reached out to him.
Yeah, so I reached out. Actually, I went to his office hours and I was just like, hey, I really like neuroscience and I really want to work in a lab. And he was like, okay, come work in my lab. And then like the rest is history. Because through that experience, I was working on a bunch of different projects. I was also able to contribute enough to be put on a paper, which then, helps build your whole trajectory, and also learn to apply for grants and things like that, for smaller institutional awards, for like little technology things. But also going through this, I was able to get into the lab, do things like this, have this opportunity. But then there's also this incentive, like I said, to have undergraduate trainees in the lab, because the smaller universities are more focused on training. And as a result, I was there, and there was also other graduate students that were willing to supervise me and help me with things. So it created this sort of environment at this smaller university that's more conducive to sort of a trajectory, setting a trajectory.
Right, for sure.
What made you choose Laurier for undergrad?
Honestly, I think the reason I chose it was because when I was in high school, I remember I wasn't that motivated per se, like in terms of anything, except that I knew that I liked neurons. I was like, I don't want to really have one of those stories of like, this is what made me.
Right.
I don't know. I just thought neurons were really cool. Like, they're so different than anything else, right, in the body. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And so Laurier had like this biology and psychology program. I think I didn't get into a couple universities, and I was like, you know what? I don't even care.
Yeah.
But you care. And then I visited Laurier and stuff like that. It just felt like a really nice home to be for undergrad. Yeah. The choice, I think, was there was this, like I said, this double major program in biology and psychology. That's what I did. And so I thought it was like a unique opportunity.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned before you're a first generation scientist, the first generation in your family. Are there any hidden rules that you came across you had to learn the hard way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, academia is just a totally different place. And so it's just funny because, well, first off, I'm first generation in terms of academia, but I still have a tremendous amount of privilege. Like, look at like who I am. For me, it wasn't so much of like a completely unattainable feeling. It was sort of like just more challenging to navigate. So I have to, emphasize that. But that said, when I was going through trying to move all these different stages, no one in my family had been to university. So it was sort of like, they were like, just do this. What about this?
Yeah. Giving
me advice along the way. And it was, it's helpful. Everyone wants to sort of, try to nurture you and support you. But it was hard to know how applicable some of those things were. And now looking back, I can see a very different set of rules in academia than, the business world or sort of any other kind of thing. And so one of the biggest things I'd say about academia is there's this trajectory that's expected, if that makes sense. So you do your undergrad, and then within that time frame, you start building a resume or CV around starting to work in labs, get involved in research, doing these different things. And then it's expected that sort of maybe in your fourth year, at the very least, you're working in a lab in the summer, and then you transition into a graduate program, either in that lab or another lab. And then from there, you do your master's, maybe your PhD in a certain number of years, and then your postdoc after that, which is the more, you're learning to become a more independent scientist. You want to do that in like 5 years. And when you start deviating from this very linear trajectory, people start to say, well, why, what happened here? And then they have all these other applications at all these different phases along the academic trajectory that sort of have lined up with that. And they've shown productivity at all those levels. And when you're sort of haven't fully matched that trajectory, people start to ask questions about why, which is not, there's many reasons, but it's just the easiest thing to start looking at when you're scrutinizing applications, if that makes sense.
And did somebody kind of run you through that, or you just kind of had to learn on the fly?
No, you just had to, and that's the thing. It was really interesting. I worked in a major research hospital in the U.S., Mount Sinai, in New York, and it was interesting because a lot of the people when I was there for postdoc. So after my PhD at U of T, when I was there, it was really interesting because I could see that there were some people who had already shaped their whole previous career around getting the key grant during postdoc. And so they worked on certain things, they did certain things during PhD to shape sort of what might support them in getting this key grant that helped them then go to the next phase, which is becoming an independent scientist, a principal investigator, professor, whatever you want to call it. And so I also saw that many of these people had parents or grandparents or anything, like that, some people who've been through the system and know. So it was interesting. Like, I was unprepared for that because I also didn't know the American system at all. It was a grant I could also apply for, but the timing didn't really work out for me. But it was just interesting to see how people had set up this whole trajectory, if that makes sense. So they knew about all the rungs on that ladder. Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting. So when you were a grad student, did you envision yourself eventually leading your own research lab, or did that career evolve in an unexpected way?
I feel like it's unexpected in the sense that I don't know if I could have fully, there were many stages where I was like, is this really going to work out? Like, is this realistically, like, you go to the next phase and you're like, really, am I going to get there? And I think it didn't evolve in any strange way. It was very linear. I tried to follow that linear trajectory as much as I could and really push and try to show productivity and do what I could. And what I would say for that is, like, you don't want to just keep your head down and only work on your own stuff. You want to get out there, collaborate, and work on other things. The career path is just like those steps. But within those steps, if you get involved in many more things that are maybe not just in the research domain that you focus on, but if you collaborate with other people, learn new skills, get involved in larger scope projects, then you are sort of getting out of that linear, like, I'm just working on my one project. So there's linearity in the projects, there's linearity in the actual moving up the ladder. But within that, if you branch out and do other things and get involved in different things, then you sort of reinforce getting to the next step. And I'd also say that, it's important to go on this trajectory, but at the same time, there could be many ways of approaching it. And one of the most important things that I found over the years is not to prepare for the next step, but to use the next step as a position to get to the step after that, if that makes sense. So, like, in terms of wanting this to be my career path, I knew that I needed to do a postdoc that was going to have impact. And so I chose a supervisor, I chose projects and things like that would support a larger scope of research that would then allow me to sort of be more marketable as an independent scientist, if that makes sense. I knew I wanted to get to that step of where I am now. It wasn't a straightforward path. There were times where, it was like, okay, I'm going to look into industry and make a LinkedIn and send some emails, because it's challenging. There's not that many jobs.
So, like, thinking 2 steps ahead.
Exactly. Okay, that's the thing. I think that's one of the most important things, I think, in academia is to not think about the next step, but to think 2 steps ahead, because you don't have time. There's no time. There's like 5 years, for example, 4 to 5 years for a PhD, 4 to 5 years for a postdoc. It seems like a long time, but the first 2-3 years are getting the ball rolling. Then things start really coming, but then you got to be ready to move to the next thing. And also, academia is really strange because you start developing productivity and then you crash again when you switch to the next phase.
Oh, I see.
You see what I mean?
You always have to keep the ball rolling. Like, once you're at that step, it's like, then you have to begin thinking of the next step immediately.
Exactly. So that's why, like, the best way to do that is to do things that you know are going to actually support the step after that, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think that was one way to do it.
Now, you've been awarded the Next Generation Award from the Canadian College of Neuropsychopharmacology, recognizing your outstanding early career achievements. What do you think really helped you stand out as an early career researcher?
Yeah, I mean, the CCNP is it's a great organization, one that I'm happy to be a part of, especially now that I'm back in Canada. A lot of it is just sort of productivity, impact, and scope of the work, and getting involved in things in postdoc that sort of allowed me to do really impactful research that wasn't just, tinkering away on one little thing. It was potentially things that, allow many other people to ask new questions, right? Open-ended sort of research. I think really what differentiates people who's sort of the next generation of scientists in these award categories, they're looking for people who are trying to make, an impact and push the field forward. I think that's what I see. I mean, I don't know. We'll find out how things move along from there.
Well, we learned that you had a paper published in Science, which is like an incredible achievement. What was that experience like?
It was interesting. The process, it's very strange. I never really thought that I would have sort of a paper in Science, if that makes sense. I distinctly remember telling in PhD one of my colleagues, I was like, I'm always going to be happy publishing in psychopharmacology. It's like these are very specific journals dedicated to, but then as I went into postdoc, I realized you have to get out of that. You have to try to push for things that are paradigm shifting as much as possible. You need to do impactful work. And so I was just very lucky to get involved and sort of develop this project that turned out to be something that we didn't really expect would yield exactly the results it yielded, but it ended up answering a really key question in neuroscience, in neuroscience of addiction. The process of actually publishing in Science, it also was maybe non-linear. It was also like you put it out there, you hope for the best, you get reviews, and the reviews say one thing, and it's a challenging process. A lot is asked for. We had to go back to the drawing board a lot of times and redo things and sort of say, okay, how can we add more to make the reviewers happy? But at the same time, I think when they know the question is good and they know the results are robust, they're going to they'll move forward with it. It's a nice idea.
Yeah, I'm just curious if it was distinct from publishing in other journals. Was there more feedback provided, more changes?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
In that context, yes, there's a lot of expectation. There is one place where it's different. In other journals, it's very much like you submit, you get a response and from the editor, and then they say it's going to go out for review and stuff like that. It was a little bit more behind the scenes where it was like the editor said, this looks pretty good, we're sending it out for review. And then when we did get it back, there was a lot of things we needed to do. There was some reviewers were very conceptually oriented, some reviewers were very technique oriented, some reviewers were a little bit more just kind of in between those two. So we did have to do quite a bit to make them feel like we've fully rounded out the whole story.
Yeah.
Like it was a lot to do, but it wasn't completely unattainable, if that makes sense. Right. When we saw the reviews come back, we were like, okay, this is manageable. It's always when you get reviews back after you've spent years on a project, it's like, we have to go back to doing this, but it's, it was all doable, if that makes sense.
Awesome.
So,
with that being said, we're going to dive in now to more of what your research involves. So for someone with a basic understanding of neuroscience, how do you explain what your lab studies?
Yeah, so our lab is interested in sort of the sides of the question of motivation. So we're really interested in the neurobiological processes that support motivated behavior and how that goes wrong in psychiatric disease. And the main focus of that is addiction. And so we have questions we're looking at in terms of just how the brain coordinates motivated behavior, goal-directed behavior in general, as well as questions about how addiction becomes a problem, how it changes brain circuits, and how those changes can last for a long time. Can we go in and sort of restructure those to make it so that we can find new targets that might serve as interventions for treating addiction? And one of the biggest focuses of our work is on relapse vulnerability. This is one of the biggest challenges in treating addiction, is that people take drugs, they can stop, but the challenge is staying, quote, clean for a long time. And maybe a day, a week, a month, a year. People often refer to having addiction as sort of a lifelong struggle, where you often see people like, I made my X number of years and I'm doing well, which is amazing to see, but there's a constant struggle. It's not necessarily a completely linear path to recovery. And so the challenge is that people are always susceptible to triggers and craving vulnerability. And so one of the most important questions we have is, can we go into the brain, look at this in terms of the functional changes to the brain circuits that are involved in motivation? Can we reverse those changes, and can we identify the molecular remodeling that's occurring in these brain circuits that might be supporting a very long-lasting vulnerability to relapse? And can we sort of reverse those changes to provide this sort of resilience to relapse vulnerability, if that makes sense?
And what's the answer to that question?
Or the answer to that question?
Yeah, is it possible?
Potentially. It's a very hard field of work to kind of. So we use animal models. I should have emphasized. We talked about this earlier. We use animal models to study this. So we actually get rodents to sort of take drugs, and then we can go into the brain and look at all these different changes. With that, there are a lot of targets that have been identified, a lot of changes, that might serve as potential targets for developing therapeutics, but we're very much still in the phase of identifying what is a tractable target. I think one of the big things in this field, and one of the things we're focusing on increasingly, is epigenetic remodeling. And so the idea that, it's not just a functional change that takes place in the reward circuit. Why doesn't it just go back to normal? Like, why does it remain for so long, and how can it remain changed for so long? And that might be through epigenetic remodeling within the brain reward circuit, which in these changes, they're quite long lasting as well. They're not necessarily changing the DNA, but they're changing how the cell kind of interprets the DNA, and they can last for a long time. And so that might be sort of commensurate with how long relapse vulnerability persists, if that makes sense. And so there's lots of people working in this field trying to identify whether or not we can go in and use drugs, often borrowed from the cancer field, that target these changes in cancer cells and try to bring them into the brain and see if we can use them as new drugs to treat addiction. The answer is there's not many targets, but I mean, one promising thing I feel like I have to say at this point is GLP-1 drugs, the Ozempics. It's you may have heard, like, they're basically, like, I don't want to say they're magic. People are viewing them as magic bullets. Like, they're sort of just dampening people's overwhelming desire to do certain things. I mean, eating is where it all started, but what's coming out is, there's promise in alcohol use disorder. My previous supervisor, Paul Fletcher, was involved in a JAMA paper where it was a clinical trial that showed that it was successful for alcohol use disorder in curbing drinking. There are studies now looking at opioid use disorder as well, which is a main focus of our lab. It's just, we don't really know how these work, but they're sort of working. It's kind of crazy.
So the same active ingredient, Ozempic, is being used for these other conditions.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very interesting because people don't really view it as a drug that's targeting something very specific in the brain. It's sort of like a broad, energy homeostasis question related to, food consumption, things like that. But it's potentially, useful. So, I mean, it might tell us something about how all of this occurs, but this is a really interesting new development in the field.
Yeah. Now, as technology continues to evolve, so do the ways that people seek reward systems. Do you have any commentary on things like phone addictions or like online gambling addictions and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, anything, like I said earlier, anything I think can sort of be addictive in a way that it engages the brain circuits that control addiction, right? Everything sort of is funneled through these systems that we experience. And I think with technology, in a way, it's designed to access those systems, right? That's why everyone looks at it. It's basically like my mice pressing levers to get, and it's not really that. It's not really that different. Just pull out your phone whenever you're bored. So it's crushing that boredom sense. But I do think that there's a lot of potential for these things to be addictive. We know it is. We know that these are addictive. We know we shouldn't give children screens. We know we shouldn't. I'm concerned for my parents with screens and the kids with screens. There's in people who are vulnerable when their brains may be developing, or maybe when people are stressed, things like this. Anything that's going to activate this system in a certain way is going to gain access and potentially snowball in terms of something that they rely on as a crutch, if that makes sense. And I think with things like AI companions and social media, social and intellectual positivity, like positive outcomes in those domains, are rewarding to us. They are incentives to us. That's how we're built. We're social animals, right? So I think that these sort of tap into that, and they give you what your brain wants in a way. So with social media, it's like, look at all this amazing stuff that's happening. Look at all these likes. I still think these companies that didn't put a dislike button, that's a huge problem. It's only positive. And then Facebook came out with emotes. They didn't actually say anything about not liking. It was just positive or reaction, which is very general. So I think all of these are designed this way so that it still keeps access over people, keeps them coming back, keeps them either people come back with outrage. It doesn't really matter how, as long as they keep coming back, right? And in terms of AI companions and things like that, you ask it a question, and even if ChatGPT or something like this, if you talk to people and they're like, yeah, it always says this is the greatest question anyone's ever asked. And it's like, okay. But the thing is, there's extremes to that example where, at the intellectual level, you want to feel like your ideas are good and relevant and things like that. But there's extremes where it's telling you this overt positivity and you won't believe it. But within that, there may be things you're discussing with these AI companions or even just general, chat, either whether it's like a true companion or if it's just like a chat bot. There's a sort of fine line between, is this, like, if you looked really under the hood, is it really a good idea? Is it really that smart? But if you keep going with it, it's just going to keep reinforcing the idea that what you brought up is interesting. Yeah. And when really you could be like, is this real? And it would be like, actually, no. But you know what I mean? So it's all of these things, unfortunately, I think they're designed to reassure you. Yeah. They're designed to make you feel that you should come back to them. And ultimately, isn't that what's happening in addiction? Right. Yeah. So it's, you lose control of key goals in your life, and you narrow the scope towards sort of whatever produced that effect.
Mm-hmm. If you ever I guess some people wonder what is the line between maybe, being kind of fond of some kind of activity or thing versus being addicted. Have you ever even struggled with something where you thought, well, geez, I'm kind of at the borderline of maybe becoming addicted to this? It could be some people have interesting addictions. There's love addiction or validation or hobbies even.
Yeah, I do think that there is that. I mean, personally, there's definitely things, in life that you start doing, especially, when you start thinking about stocks or something like that, right? That can very easily become a situation where you're always checking and, you're loss chasing and things like that, right? This is all, we know this, you can do this, you see it. I mean, in terms of hobbies and things like that, there are definitely, personally, there's a lot of different things that that I do that give me joy and positive feedback and things like that. But I think one of the big challenges with these is vulnerabilities, right? So I think this is what addiction often comes back to, is we can study addiction, for example, but not everybody becomes addicted to something after they use it or try it once or twice, be it a substance or a behavior or, because there's lots of things that can potentially become addictive. And this gets back to the question of, I think it has more to do with vulnerabilities, which who knows how they're programmed. People can say that there are answers to this, but there are no answers. We just know that this is possible. We don't know how it all plays out. We don't know the mechanisms. But I think the easiest and most online way to see this is stress, right? And if people are stressed, they often will continue doing something that gives them feedback that, maybe they shouldn't be doing. The problem is sometimes these brain systems, the reward circuit that controls motivation and addiction, it's not just the go circuit, it's the stop circuit, right? And so sometimes that stop circuit gets suppressed. Maybe the go circuit isn't driving so hard, but maybe you lose control of the stop circuit, if that makes sense.
Right.
Then in those situations, be it stress, be it, pre-programmed vulnerabilities through early life stress or some sort of developmental vulnerabilities, anything. It could be many, many factors, but I think that those vulnerabilities are what might promote sort of a shift from just a regular use to something that sort of loses control.
Yeah. I mean, I've been noticing recently in the beauty industry, people are using Botox, lip filler, getting plastic surgeries, and you can kind of see it looks okay, and then they start looks like they're getting addicted to the surgery, and they don't know where to stop. And you're an addictions researcher. Have you ever had this situation where you don't know, maybe it's a friend or a family member? For example, if you saw that happening, would you say something or?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There have been personal experiences in our family where, you try to intervene as much as possible. It's hard because it's sort of it's hard to get through to people sometimes, right?
Yeah.
It's very challenging. So it's not like you can necessarily just tell somebody that, okay, what you're doing is not good for you. I mean, their brain doesn't believe you. It's just not true in their experience and their lived experience. I mean, it's sort of, you can't really see it, and you're using a logical explanation when this may be not really a logical problem for the individual that's going through this. It's not necessarily like, oh, you're right, I'll just stop. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not like that. Yeah. I mean, like I said, there are many different brain systems involved, and a lot of these brain systems are extremely powerful, and they're designed in certain ways to make us do things no matter how hard we try to stop it. It's not really a willpower thing. Our brains are designed to do this. And so then it's hard to bring in our, much later evolved evolutionary, late brain, like prefrontal cortex, to be like, hey, maybe just don't do that. And it's not really going to land, because it's not really what the person's experiencing necessarily. Maybe, I mean, they may listen, they may, we talk like there's, speaking of TV shows, there was a show Intervention and stuff, but ultimately it's whether or not these things work. It sort of varies a lot on the individual, I think. Yeah.
So that person with let's say the extreme lip filler, where it's like crazy thick, like they're seeing that as like, oh, I look perfectly fine. In fact, I think I need a little bit more of that.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it comes back to things like vulnerabilities. Did the person have body dysmorphia growing up? Did they, have a situation where maybe they don't feel good about themselves, and maybe someone was offered this as a solution? You got to remember, everything's being marketed towards people, and all we're basically doing is using our later evolved brain areas to stop people from accessing that reptilian brain of, go do, what I mean? It's got to be challenging to have that, because you just don't, you're not going to see it the same way if you're the person going through it, because you are fulfilling something that your brain is telling you to fulfill, maybe. Well, this is all, I have to say, this is all like over extrapolation of what's going on, but it's a potential, explanation. Makes sense.
Okay, so now we've been talking a lot about your research, your career path, and addiction. We want to switch things up a little, and we're going to play a quick game of your top picks. So we will give you a series of rapid fire questions, and you have to give us basically your number one answer to that question. So whether it's neuroscience, addiction, research, or just your life in general, you'll get to give us your favorite.
All right, let's see. Let's see. Misconception of addiction that you come across in your work. One of the biggest ones is that it's all a willpower issue, right? I just talked about that. Like, it's not just, you can't just stop it. It's not necessarily a thing. This is you fighting neurobiology. I truly think that's the most important misconception, is that it's willpower. Piece of advice for psychology students, put yourself out there and get involved in as much research as you can. You have to get started early, so getting involved in labs, if that's what you want to do, or just either way, you just have to put yourself out there. You can't expect things to come to you if you don't go out and even let people know that you're looking for things. Right? So, and there's always going to be people who people want to help. Is more than social media makes us believe. Way you unwind after a long day in the lab. Oh my God, I don't really unwind anymore because I have kids.
Too busy.
Just hang out with friends, grabbing a coffee with somebody. One of the best things to do, this is after a long day in lab, but in general, like, my favorite thing to do is go to like museums with my daughter and stuff like that. So, nice. just go and enjoy the city. Yeah. That's the best thing to do. Nice. Unanswered questions about the brain that fascinates you the most. It's a really hard one. There's a lot. There's a lot of unanswered questions. Honestly, I think there's more questions than answers. Probably just how there can be so many synapses and it makes sense. You know what I mean? It's crazy. You got like one neuron with, anyway. Yeah, just how the brain translates chaos into order. I think that's the biggest question. Yeah. Habit or skill that has contributed the most to your success as a scientist. I think learning to reframe things as what is the question, I think, is the most important. So like not just doing things for the sake of doing them, but saying, what is the question? What are we trying to address, rather than just doing things for the sake of doing it? I don't know if it's a habit or a skill. And then best part of your career that keeps you inspired. Oh yeah, that one's easy. It's trainees. It's working with students and being reminded that this is exciting and fun. Is not, working with students, collaborating with people. That's that's the most important, because it can get sort of very tedious, but seeing trainees go through the process is amazing.
So now after that segment, we're going to dive into just more about general student advice. So hearing about your journey really highlights the different paths a career in psychology can take. So for students interested in research or grad school, what opportunities or experiences had the biggest impact on your career?
Yeah, I kind of touched on that earlier. I think the most important thing was getting into a lab relatively early. And just it's all about trajectory in academia. You have to sort of get involved and volunteer. Like, unfortunately, you may not get paid, but you sort of do it. But there's other ways of doing it. You can do it through a course-based a project in a lab. You can do sort of like a placement program through different organizations, co-ops that might support you. But get involved early. That's the most important thing. And then sort of when you're there, trying to form a network and meet other people, work with graduate students, and sort of open yourself up to asking new questions about the work. I think that's the most important starting point. But then after that, the concrete things are you need to try to apply for awards and grants. There's the undergraduate summer research awards through NSERC, which are really important to look for. And then trying to find supervisors who you might be able to work on a research proposal for graduate school for through the natural sciences or CIHR. Getting these awards and things like that are really important. I was fortunate to get some of these early on, and it helps because not only do you become free to the supervisor almost with these awards, you also have that as showing that you're fundable and you now are somebody who these organizations are willing to invest in.
Right.
It's not just like a feather in your cap kind of thing. It's a tangible that, if you can get these awards, you sort of need to have you have to have pretty good grades for this. So you always got to be, stay in school, kids, right? It's once you get these, you sort of set a path forward within these organizations. Having people who support you is probably one of the most important things, and trying to find ways to talk to professors, talk to graduate students, and just form a network of people who are willing to support you, either at the actual scientific or research level, but also more than that. Because say you're interested in going to this school for grad studies and you're working in a lab with a certain supervisor, and they can speak on your behalf, right? So instead of cold emailing people, one of the things that's helped me a lot is warming up cold emails, if that makes sense. So like having somebody vouch for you, put you in touch to that supervisor, but they email. You see what I mean? So it's like, this is a crucial thing because, I get a lot of emails from students. I try to respond to all of them. But if I had somebody who was like, hey, you got to take this student, right? Then it not to say that everybody, I'm sure all these students are fantastic. Like I'd take everybody if I could. Yeah. It helps warm things up and gives it a lot of credibility. So but on that level, it's also important to choose who you work with. You want to try to work with nice people. That's very important, right? If you're working with people who are not that ready to support you, or like you never see them and you don't form a relationship. This goes back to the original question of being at a small university. The research labs may themselves be smaller, so you actually have more access to forming a relationship with the supervisor, and then that supervisor can then help you get to the next step. So it all comes together in that way.
You talked about some of these hard aspects of hard skills, like in terms of like grades, getting involved in research early. Can you talk about some of the soft skills students need when they're applying to grad school? Some of the maybe interpersonal things or the mindset that you need to have when you're applying? Yeah,
I think, you sort of, the soft skills they've got to be more along the lines of like, you have to be able to communicate effectively. Not only your emails, everybody knows when somebody writes an email with ChatGPT. I did something where I got like 200 emails for a program and 180 of them were clearly probably ChatGPT. So like, don't do that. We don't want to hear a big long story. I don't want to hear about, how fascinated you were with the paper that I was middle author on. We want to see that you can communicate, that you're genuine, and that you're genuinely interested. I'd rather have somebody that emails me that says, look, I'm really trying to get involved in things. I'm really interested in the work that you're doing. If you already have skill sets, talk about those skill sets. you want to show to a supervisor that you're interested in asking questions and sort of, it doesn't need to be this big, long thing where it's like an essay and I have to scroll. I'm like, I have enough emails. But it sort of the soft skills come back to like communication, showing that you're genuine and sort of being able to meet and communicate when you actually go for an interview. And then one of the things I think is like, letting people know, being able to let people know what you're looking for, right? And so sharing, sort of managing up, if that makes sense, and sort of saying like, this is what I need. I want to do this. It's also showing that you, like I said, are ready to jump into that sort of upswing of trajectory of academia. You want to apply for things. You want to do this. I say this all in the context of assuming the path is you're emailing somebody before applying to a graduate program, for example, because there's two ways of going about it, right? You can apply to the graduate program, get in, and then find a supervisor, or you can try to line that up beforehand. Personally, it's sometimes easier to line things up beforehand, and then you join the department. This is one of those, in terms of soft skills, communication is the biggest thing. And you have to be able to show that when it comes time for you to communicate things, that you'll be able to do it as well,
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What about students dealing with rejection or no? Like, I imagine, having a resilient kind of mindset versus like waiting for things to be just kind of handed to you. And if it's not there, you're just going to give up.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. It's a funny context because on the one hand, yes, absolutely. You have to be resilient. A lot of this is not, usually none of this is personal, right? For me, for example, I get emails, but I need to make sure the funding lines up. I have to, I'm not going to take people on if I don't know I can pay them. Yeah. Because graduate students in preclinical research or neuroscience, like they get stipends. So their salary is paid, whatever salary. It's not high enough to, in my opinion, to live in some of these cities. But either way, there has to be money in my budget to be able to pay. And if it's not, if I say no, that's usually the reason. It's not necessarily because I don't know about you, like you're not great. I mean, there are situations obviously where I see, okay, I have a few people who, and I'm choosing somebody, well, this person has skills, they can hit the ground running for this short master's, for example, like master's of 2 years, you already know how to do a bunch of stuff in the lab, you come in and you hit the ground running. It's not personal to anybody else. It's just that on our end, we have a job to do. We have grants to get. We have papers to write. It's just sort of, we have to keep moving along. Resiliency is so crucial because not only is it important to be resilient in that sense, you have to understand that when you do science, everything fails all the time. Probably a majority of the stuff that I've done just hasn't worked, because we're coming up with hypotheses based on our own ideas. And then it's like, well, that wasn't a good idea, I guess. So when things don't pan out, resiliency is probably one of the most important things that I look for in trainees, actually, especially when, a lot of science is repetitive, a lot of science takes time. And so having that resiliency is crucial. Overall, just not only in the communication, but also in the mindset is crucial. Right.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about research grants. What advice would you give students when they are applying for these grants? What would be your top advice?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the different grants at different levels have different things they look for. Right. So if it's earlier on, there's a lot of focus on grades. Early on, that's the easiest metric everybody can align is to say grades. We identify all these, your straight A's. That's a proportion of the grant is looked at grades. Then another proportion of the scoring of the grant is looked at from how well articulated is the research proposal. I'm talking about more like the federal level grants. Like there's smaller ones that may vary quite a bit, but these like the NSERC and CAMH, these big grant mechanisms that are federal or provincial, like the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, they look for grades, research proposal, and then your sort of the training plan, like what you plan to sort of build out through this grant. I think one of the most important things for obviously the grades, you control that by doing well in university. But for the research proposal, I think is where people really ask this question, and it's important. It's all about storytelling. Like all sciences is storytelling. It seems like it's more complicated, but it's not. It's just clarity, simplicity, straightforward ideas. That's mostly what scientific writing is. the more it starts getting complicated, the more you start using too many adjectives. And you know what I mean? Like it's the most important thing is keeping it straightforward. And also one of the things that people tend to do is they think they need to make it much bigger than it needs to be. It needs to be feasible within the time frame of the grant, which sounds, kind of silly, but like it can't be, I'm going to go and fix addiction, right? Like you can't be grandiose about it. It has to be like, okay, I'm going to answer these specific questions, which are within this domain, to address this problem. And then within that, you just write about that specific set of experiments.
Now, on this podcast, we like to delve in a bit to the psychology of money, and just curious how the same reward systems that are involved in addiction play a role in financial behaviors like spending, saving, risk-taking.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. And the reason I think it's really interesting from a neurobiological perspective, because what is money, right? Like, what is it? And the thing is, we can talk about addiction, we can talk about food and things that have intrinsic value to our biology, things that hijack reward circuits. Sure, those are all things that are actually producing an effect that clearly impacts our biology. But money has no bearing. It really is just paper, right? It has, or now it's just numbers on a screen. Like it's not even real money. But the thing is, what money is something referred to as a secondary reinforcer. So it's something that gains value through its ability to predict or obtain something that has value. So there's a lot of research on secondary rewards, but what's really interesting is it's probably comes back to dopamine and the same circuits that we've been talking about in terms of addiction, where there's these go circuits that make you pursue money. But what's really interesting is that these secondary rewards, or things that are associated with obtaining rewards, they tend to become the things that elicit that dopamine response. So over time, this is like the classic reward prediction error. Money may predict the ability to purchase something, and so maybe the dopamine spike happens as a result. The dopamine comes with the money now, less so the outcome, if that makes sense. Right. So like there's, in terms of the desire to seek it out and obtain it, but we know there's lots of these secondary rewards. They have a very powerful control over behavior. In addiction, cues and environments and people that are associated with drug use, they become really powerful triggers for relapse and reuse. You think about McDonald's or something. Sometimes you're not hungry, but you see golden arches, and now you're hungry. Money, it's all in the same circuits as these conditioned rewards of money. But it's interesting because it's got to have even deeper value. But it also goes back to those brain circuits that I talked about, sort of the stop circuits, right? Where that's where you're trying to develop like good spending habits and, trying to save versus suppressing risk-taking, money, ventures or gambling, things like that. But those same circuits are crucial for, impulse control and things like that. There's variations in all of these, the way these circuits actually control our behavior around money. They also become compromised potentially over time by stress, things like that. It's all filtered through the same brain systems, regardless of what it is. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, the money can get you access to all these kind of tangible resources, but also can reflect, your status, your self-esteem, your sense of security. So there's so much more meaning behind it. We even talked about, like taking on grad students. Sometimes it's about money, to be frank. Like it's so
everything is, unfortunately. This is what's interesting is now that I'm a PI, now that I'm running my own lab, you realize how important it is. You're sort of guided by your ability to obtain resources, right? So, and it's just wild when you come to the other side and realize it really is, unfortunately, all about money.
It's really interesting too to see when people are seeking money just for the sake of money. They've lost touch with like what it obtains them. It's just like they hit a number and then they just want a bigger number.
Well, now before we wrap up, we would just like to ask some more closing questions. I know we asked a similar question like this before, but if you could answer instantly one unanswered question about addiction, what would it be?
About addiction? Really, how it comes to consume somebody so quickly and how it sort of overtakes other goals in life.
Right.
That's the most important question I think I have. And that's some of the work that we're doing is looking at that. Because we have value for many different things in life, but suddenly that shifts away and people lose their homes, people lose their families. So
it takes over.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you had one piece of advice for someone who wanted to pursue a similar career as yours that was at the undergraduate level, what would that be?
I already touched on it. I think just putting yourself out there and getting involved. The most important thing is finding a way to get involved because you have to start early. It's just easier. It makes the whole process easier. So getting involved in a research lab and then finding ways to continually show productivity throughout and just, putting your head down, but at the same time, opening up to collaboration and also just sort of like work hard and be nice to people because, you're going to bring people to you if you're a positive force.
Is that what you see? Like if you see a standout student, like what kind of comes to mind? What kind of attributes do they have?
Yeah, I think the ability to become interested in things, that's one of the most important. It's not just being interested currently. It's if something changes, are you going to find a way to look into this and become interested in it? So that sort of growth mindset, if that makes sense. And then also we touched on this resilience because you absolutely need to be able to sort of give yourself a day when things don't work out, but then come back to the drawing board the next day. And that resilience is crucial as well. I always say like, I'll take a motivated B student over an unmotivated A student any day. Like people have to want this. Yeah. If your sort of heart's not in it, and if you're not really going to push forward, you're not going to be able to take a step back when things go wrong and you immediately fall apart, then, it makes it a lot harder to face what science entails. I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's just been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today and hope this inspires all of our listeners in psychology, what career paths you can take, and all this great advice that you have given today. So thank you so much.
It's great to be here. Thank you, guys. This was fun. Yeah.
Great. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Enriched Mindset Podcast.